Personnel Committee meeting. I'm Deborah Brooks, your chair. Hello, we're good?
Yep.
Can you see me?
Just hit the start button.
I'm
You ready?
ready. Yes, it's on.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Make sure you're on the right page. Nothing changed since I was here last. Camera and screen. Yep. Camera feed. So we're gonna send out the camera, the table. Okay, I'm gonna check on the back end.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Making sure that everybody can see and hear us. With me today are members of my committee, Nanette Malconian, Sandra Alvarez, our liaison, Dr. Shields, and Javi down at the end of the table. Okay, without further ado, right now we don't have any committee.
No guests, we always have guests
Community
lately.
guests, but the morning's young.
Early.
Okay, we have a lot to accomplish, so Dr.
Yes, we
Shields.
do. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the minutes that have already been approved by the Board of Education. That's from March 7th. Moving on to the personnel update. There will be a recommendation made to the board on a new director of guidance for Tuesday's meeting. So we look forward to having that in place for this coming July 1. We're also moving forward on the teacher vacancies that we've received due to retirements. So we're in the process of doing demonstration lessons and interviewing and moving those people through the regular process to bring them on board. So that's taking place, and you'll start to see them on the agendas over the next few agendas. So that brings us to 1.3 on the agenda, which is student harassment and bullying prevention and intervention. Ms. Brooks?
Okay, so we have mandatory updates from the state. We had started on this back in September, sent it out to the attorneys for review, and they have finally given it back to us. So I don't know if there's been internal review of the regulations, so I just want to put on everybody's tickler that the regulations, I think, also should be synthesized with the policy, because I'm noticing there's redundancy. There are definitions in the policy, there are definitions in the regulation, so NISBA tends to go a little overboard with putting the kitchen sink into policy and regulation. So after our work today is done, I would recommend, hopefully the committee will agree, that, welcome to the committee, committee person, that the committee will agree to give it to the attorneys to do a better synthesis and remove redundancies. Okay, so having said that, before I go into, and I've actually reviewed this with counsel to understand why certain changes were made in the policy. Does anybody have any questions or comments about what they see in the policy so far? And everybody should have a red line version.
Few technical questions. Page 3, protected groups, was missing gender.
It's there, page 3.
Gender.
Including gender identity
And expression.
So gender identity and expression, but gender itself wasn't.
It says gender, including gender identity and expression.
So we're on page 3, second to last paragraph, which is all in yellow, that one, that big one. The last
Oh, that's where you
sentence.
mean, okay.
So for the purpose of this policy, tolerance, respect for others, then it lists everything. The third line will say gender identity, expression, nothing says gender.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. So one of the things, since you've gone directly to that paragraph, one of the things I noticed is that this language is not in the NISBA template. This entire paragraph that begins, the district shall ensure, and all the way down to where it ends, religious practice, period. And so the question for the committee is, do we want to recommend that this paragraph be included? It was given to us, interestingly, by Howard Miller in September, but subsequently, his colleague with whom I worked on this past week said, it's not necessary, it's not necessarily recommended. So since we're in this paragraph right now, why don't we discuss whether we want to have this paragraph?
So my only thought when I read this paragraph, because I saw the notes, your note and then Mara's note, was in my mind, I was trying to reference other policies where curriculum is specifically listed outwardly like this. And due to the timing, I did not have enough time to find it, but are other kind of broader policies referencing curriculum this much?
If I can get into,
Or ducks.
I'm like not really good with this, but I believe, and we can check and bring this back, I believe there's a policy that discusses something relating to civility, citizenship, and character education. If,
Oh, so
and
it's
I
just like
can't, it might be,
not on board docs.
Oh, I feel like we've read that recently.
and I wanted it on our wish list, that we had a whole bunch of curriculum policies over the past couple of years, but I'm
Do you want me
really
to
bad with my
give you
phone.
board docs?
Yeah, well,
I logged in.
yeah, I don't want to, let's go to policy.
Oh, it's not touch, sorry. I'm
Oh,
not
it's not
clever
touch.
enough, no.
All right, if you could just put, I
Yeah.
just don't want to spend a lot of time,
Yeah.
we got a lot to do. So let's put that
Table that one.
question,
Okay.
yes.
That was just one of my questions, only because if we're gonna get really in the weeds of listing curriculum within our policies, I just hadn't seen a different one that says that, aside from like promoting through the mission of the mission statement of the district.
Right.
This was very specific on specific
Yes.
items.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm not opposed to such language, I just didn't wanna not be consistent with all of our policies.
So the previous paragraph says, well, it's different, because one, it says curricular material that raises awareness.
Yeah. It's
Will be
specific.
included in the instructional program. So I feel as though that
Is enough.
paragraph, that small line is enough, rather than dictating the following line, which is more dictating curriculum within this policy. But we can, I do feel like there's a character education policy, it's probably from the 1990s, but I just feel like I remember it from somewhere. But, so we can check on that. Okay?
So if that gets removed, my gender comment isn't
Right.
removed.
Understood. Any other comments?
Yeah, so logistically on page 6, it said about the complaint form.
Where are you?
I'm trying to find it.
Monitoring and review? I don't know where the complaint form is.
It says it.
Oh, non-retaliation, all complainants? No?
One moment, sorry.
Okay, yeah,
I'm
I'll be quiet.
Sorry, I'm just
That's
trying to
okay.
scroll to page 6.
Oh, a bullying complaint form will be available on the district's website.
Correct.
Under dissemination,
I've never
monitoring,
seen
and
such
review.
a thing. Do we have a bullying complaint form
There is,
for all grades? It's not reported, it's like an actual bullying complaint form?
yeah, it's a harassment complaint form.
Okay.
Is it called harassment complaint form?
I don't know, remember the exact title at the head, but
It
I
should
believe-
match.
I believe,
Okay.
It should
believe
absolutely
it
match.
does.
Okay, so
Yeah, because I
this
don't think
should
I've
be-
seen something that said like bullying form. I know about report it, but that specific one. So just, again, if we don't have one, I was gonna say, then why do we list it? And if we do have one,
We do have one.
We do have one, so we'll find out the name.
I've given it to staff upon request.
Okay, and the other, actually, on top of that, we do have reported. And so one of the questions I raised, since we're in that paragraph, one of the questions I raised is, do we want to mention reported? Because there are instances here on page 5 where it's, or begins on page 4, incident reporting and investigation. I'm wondering if the reporting part of it, that sentence about, well, is a bullying complaint form the same as reporting bullying?
So in the back of our regulation, 5025R is the form, if you're interested.
oh, okay.
Okay. So. is-
Like, what's the difference?
Right, is it, right, so in other words, can we put a bullying reporting form, or can we move the sentence about the complaint form into, and everything that relates to complaint, into incident reporting and investigation? Can we move that under the header?
Can I
Doesn't go-
say
In
that
other
again?
words, sorry, so the sentence that Sandra raised,
Page 6.
the second sentence under dissemination, monitoring, and review says, a bullying complaint form will be available on the district's website. district will ensure the process of report is clearly explained. Can we put that sentence under the incident reporting and investigation section? Wouldn't that make more sense?
I think as long as it's in there, that's okay.
And then you brought up a different question with reported, but
Yes.
reported is anonymous, right? Like, that's just, so this isn't referencing anonymity, being anonymous with a report. Like, it even said, like, we want everyone to come forward and be able to speak up, blah, blah, blah. Teachers, you have 1 day to do it, or 2 days to the principal. So maybe there's a reason, like, with reported, maybe reported should be referenced, like, that there's a way to file a complaint anonymously, whereas all of this is saying you need to be forthcoming on what occurred, where you can't be anonymous. And the bullying form, if you look at it, you can't be anonymous on that one. So
Right.
maybe a reference of like, we understand that bullying can be a sensitive subject. If you need to be anonymous, report it is an avenue, I don't know. Or if that is in regulation, I don't know.
My only caution would be that, what if report it goes away, and you have a policy mentioning
Yeah.
a piece of software?
Yeah.
So, I understand that you're looking for a mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also am not a fan of reported, I'm not gonna lie, because it's only for secondary. So it's just more of like, you brought up reported, so I thought maybe.
Yes, because I didn't know if it had a place here, and as I think it through, a lot of this policy is directed at helping the targeted student.
Yeah.
And I don't know how reported works in terms of investigating. I guess it's good in terms of investigating the students who are engaging in the bullying and stopping that, but there have to be witnesses, right? There has to be.
There has to be some level of detail within the
Detail to have
reported
an
for us to be able to
investigation.
act upon it.
Yeah.
An investigation, so the purpose of this, so that I'm trying to think, if reported goes away, right, then we have a problem, because now
Yeah.
we've referenced it in the policy. So I don't know if,
The way you stated it with like the intention of the policy makes me feel that it's even more important to have an anonymous option, because as far as like ongoing bullying, right? Repeated bullying, those are like repeatedly observed by someone. But a single incident of harassment, that might be that someone anonymously feels that they need to report that. And they are not doing the bullying form. And that's the nature of reported, that's the nature of like even for mandated reporters, sometimes like you can anonymously call in a case of child abuse, right? Like you just give enough details, it's up to the person, that company to decide if it was enough to actually investigate it. So I do think that regardless of what term we use, if we list reported now, because again,
This can be modified.
it can be always like changed, but I do think it's important to list somewhere that
Okay.
like, that the district that our policy is that, yes, we want people to be forthcoming of information so that we can properly investigate. However, there's always gonna be options to do it anonymously, and we should be in favor of that. So especially if we switch from reported, I would heavily like to know what we are putting in place instead of reported. But I do think we should have some sort of anonymous option, just because of these single incidents.
okay, so I can work with the attorney to figure out I like some of the language that the district believes that being forthcoming with information is important to be able to investigate. However, there are times when students will wish to be anonymous. In such cases, use reported to the extent available or something like that, so that, I'll figure that out. Okay.
Now, so we should, do we agree that this should match? And it should be
Harassment
called
complaint form.
harassment complaint form, not a bullying complaint form?
Yes, thank you. Harassment complaint form.
And I only had one other question.
Yeah.
It was discussed, what is, page 4. Now I'm going to go to my page. The addition, I couldn't tell, okay, Debbie mentioned, so the top, in addition, the superintendent will
In
establish.
quotes, which,
Yeah,
that's
So-
because that paragraph had been dropped from, it was in the NISBA template, but when the NISBA template was transferred into this document, this paragraph was accidentally removed.
okay,
So it's been added back in because it's from the NISBA template, but it is optional,
correct.
according to
So
NISBA.
I did read that, and I read Mara's note about how it being optional, and it's not a bad practice. I was wondering if the cabinet, if the administration had an opinion on it, this bullying prevention coordinating committees in each school that oversee the district-wide
Will be overseen
DEC.
by.
Yeah, overseen by them. So just this like district-wide task force to really kind of spearhead this policy. Has,
Yeah, when I read this paragraph, it's very specific and unique. It's not, the language that's being used here is not what we have in Port Washington. So for example, we do have a Dignity Act coordinator for the district. We also have Dignity Act coordinators that you appoint every year in every building. So we do have that structure in place. We don't have what they're describing as a bullying prevention coordinating committee in each school, but we do have teams in each school that address things like this. We don't have a district-wide committee that oversees each of those teams. So for example, when we sit down and review the code of conduct on an annual basis, that's done with a district-wide committee to look at it to see that it's effective and in place. But I'm just sharing with you that this language of a bullying prevention committee is not something that we have in place.
And would you recommend having it in place, or should this entire paragraph be deleted? Because the preceding paragraph talks about the board will designate an annual reorg, the Dignity Act coordinator for each school, and one of them will be the district-wide coordinator. Is that an accurate statement?
That is an
One
accurate
of
statement.
the individual DACs from a school is actually the coordinator?
Correct.
Okay, so,
I think that paragraph that you just referenced on the bottom of page 3 is sufficient, and it doesn't need to go into the level of detail that you're seeing on the top of page 4.
is everybody okay with that?
I'm fine with it, yep. You already said that within the buildings, there are groups working on this.
Absolutely.
It's just not a district-wide, which is sometimes, it's very different district-wide, so, yep.
Sure.
Okay, so because it's an optional paragraph, I'm not even gonna redline it, I'm just gonna remove it.
Yep,
Okay.
that was it. I think that was my fault.
Ms. Melkonen,
Oh, no,
and
no,
welcome to Dr. Pernick.
There's
Yes.
one
Hello.
after.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, good morning. This one, just, I'm making a reference, this one does state annual review of the policy for effectiveness at the end.
Yes, okay,
I'm just referencing, it does state that, so since we're on it,
yes.
I mean, again, I believe council is gonna let us know of any ones that are legally required, but this would just be, a question for the committee. If it's not legally required, do we want an annual review? It's page 6 probably.
Yeah, it's this middle paragraph of dissemination. Each year, as part of the annual review of the Code of Character, Culture, and Conduct, this policy will be reviewed to assess its effectiveness and compliance.
So is that accurate? Does this actually get reviewed via the Code of Character, CCCCC?
So it's a question for council.
Both, yeah.
Are we required? Yeah, and actually, when I spoke to Mary yesterday, she said, we've already spoken to Howard about this, but if you have a list,
Yeah,
template, please
okay.
give it to us. So I will ask if this is legally required. If not legally required, do we want it?
When we review, the annual review of the Code of Conduct is just what we did kind of the last meeting, right? It's just like whatever, because at some point that committee is gonna cease to exist.
Could, depends if there's
Potential.
more work to do.
Pre-committee,
Mhm.
the policy would just be here reviewed, right?
Yes.
But that committee was created to create that policy.
Create the like a
Or
new version.
completely
Yeah,
revamp
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yes,
But prior, it would just be at policy for
Correct.
annual.
correct.
I mean, listen, harassment, bullying prevention is a very important topic, so I wouldn't be opposed that it stays. But whatever the committee is in
Okay,
favor.
so I will ask council if it's legally required, and
And we'll take
if
it from
not,
Yeah.
what is the recommendation?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
You're on.
as usual, it's me talking about certain levels of tone that I have questions about. So if we go to page 5, bottom, last paragraph, disciplinary consequences remediation. Trying to model our CCCC, there's a different tone there, right? It's about
Restorative.
thank you.
Possibly,
Restorative
I think,
processes,
yeah.
correct. So can we remove disciplinary and just leave it at consequences / remediation? Or do people have other language choices they prefer?
I can ask council if there's a reason that it's disciplinary consequences. In other words, is disciplinary necessary?
Right. And it
We
even.
just have
it-
consequences.
Right. And it talks about the fact that it would be very based upon the incident and students, et cetera. So, and based on the code, it's, which has a very different, as I said, tone. So in that paragraph, the last sentence, if appropriate, again, disciplinary action that is measured, balanced, and age appropriate. So the second part of that sentence sounds very similar to how we're approaching our code of conduct. So I would potentially like to see disciplinary action modified as well in that sentence.
Okay.
Maybe, if appropriate, consequences that are measured, balanced, and age appropriate will be taken. Support something like that. Again, page 6, the full paragraph, consequences for a student who commits an act of bullying. If you go down, and the student's history of problem behaviors. There's that tone again for me.
What did we use in the student's history of?
Oh, and the student's history. I don't think we need to judge what the student's history is. It's the student's history.
Okay, I'll ask council if there's a reason that that's in there, because these are very legalistic. Yeah.
Yes, I
So-
know, every time I want to say
So I
something.
I understand your
lawyers tell me
comment.
I can't. I think those were my comments, yes.
Just on a note on that, the table of contents for CCCCC does not use the word disciplinary. I was trying to see where I just had it. So as far as the table of contents, they use prohibited student conduct. So I'm fine as long as the attorney's good with that change. There is the word discipline 31 times in the code of conduct as I look it up. But as far as like the actual subject, the way you're asking for it, it would be consistent with the CCCCC.
Okay, so one of the things that the attorney did was, when you see the redlining, just so the community understands, there was a lot of redundancy in harassment, bullying, there was redundancy. So that was streamlined, that's why you see some of this, purple lining, which is redlining. When we get to the definition for discrimination, I actually have a problem with it because it says, and this is also, I think, what's in the code of conduct, And I was always taught you never use the word that you're trying to define in the definition. So it says discrimination means discrimination, and right there I just said, okay, well, this doesn't help me. So, and that also I think should be revised in our code of conduct. So I'm going, with the committee's permission, I'm going to ask our attorneys to define, give us a better definition of what discrimination is. There's actually, excuse me, a discrimination in the NISBA policy. In this sample, it says discrimination is the act of denying rights, benefits, justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with permission, this is the one place where I would like us to diverge from the code of conduct and not have the same definition of the code of conduct right now, and for us to change the definition in the code of conduct as we're going through. Because to me, discrimination means discrimination is just not the right way to define.
Yep.
Yes, okay, I don't have to beat that one to death?
That's great.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the things that council and I agreed on after the revision was on page 2, where harassment, the definition of harassment has been redlined. The very last sentence, the harassing behavior may be based on any characteristic, including but not limited to a person's actual perceived, and then colon. That sentence needs to be included at the end of the definition for harassment and bullying. So just making sure everybody's aware that that's going to be moved. Should not have been deleted. Excuse me. On page 3, after all the, yeah.
Sorry, because at the beginning of this, you said it's duplicative between the regulation and the policy, so
Yes.
is it staying in the policy or is it
That's
going
what-
to regulation?
That's what I'm going to ask
Okay,
the attorney to decide.
Yeah, I think you should write the policy the way you see it's most effective, and then we can adjust the regulation accordingly following.
Then on the top of page 3, after the bullets, the sentence for the purpose of this definition, the terms blah, 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 that's stated elsewhere in the policy, so that's going to be deleted. The little asterisk in red really should be a footnote, so I'm gonna make sure that's a footnote. Okay. Now to the substance. Under prevention, the last sentence reads, staff members and students will be sensitized through district-wide professional development. The word sensitized bothered me, because I don't know, to me, it doesn't really, sensitize almost meant like you'll learn tolerance, you'll learn how to tolerate it, and it's, so I'm asking for, is there a different word? If you agree that the word sensitize, it just, it almost sounds like sanitize, it just, it just didn't sound right to me. Will be made aware, will be educated, will be, I don't know what the word is.
Will be introduced to the warning signs of bullying? Will be educated in the warning signs?
Educated?
Seems to work.
And if we don't like that word, I'm just saying it here publicly, we can always work on it offline and everybody will see it when it comes back. So that was one thing. At the end of the next sentence, where it says curricular material that raises awareness to sensitivity, et cetera, will be included in the instructional program K through 12. And I thought it would be good to add as appropriate, or as developmentally appropriate, or something that lets the community know that there are some issues that will be addressed in curriculum in 12th grade that won't be addressed in kindergarten because they're not appropriate. So can we add something that says as developmentally appropriate? Is that okay?
And isn't it supposed to say that raises awareness?
Sure, that raises awareness.
I only have,
Yeah, I
Mine
can put
raise.
raises.
Okay.
Okay, then, just want to make sure that I'm mixing my notes up with anybody else's notes. Under intervention, wherever we see, so in the second, no, is it? Yeah, the end of the second sentence, it says, and protect the target. I felt that was cold. So I asked the attorney, I said, protect the target, what does that mean? And she said, well, protect the student who's been the victim of bullying. So I said, then can we say the targeted student or the student who's, because targeted student is a lot fewer words than student who's been the victim of the bullying. But to protect the target just sounded weird to me.
Targeted individual?
Targeted student, is it only to students? I think it's to students. So can we say that the targeted student?
Right.
Are we okay with that? And again, the next paragraph, intervention will focus upon the safety of the targeted student rather than the target, so forth and so on. Okay. Under provisions for students who do not feel safe at school, I thought it was important to put the second sentence before the first sentence. So to say, students who do not feel safe at school are limited in their capacity, limited in their capacity to learn and reach their academic potential. I thought that was an important sentence, and it shouldn't be lost in the paragraph. So it should be first. Does anybody have a problem with that? And obviously, when this is red line, you'll get to see. I just thought it was important, it shouldn't be second, it should be first. Okay, in the paragraph about incident reporting and investigation, going on to page 5, where it talks about within one school day, I asked the attorney, you make an oral report within one school day of what? What is the trigger?
I didn't know what you wrote of what. I was trying to figure out what she
Yes,
what.
like what is the trigger at one school day of?
Of the incident?
Right, so, and she said, of learning or becoming aware of an incident of bullying. So I'm going to insert that language there, and also after the 2 school days, so it's very clear what the triggering event is, that triggers the reporting. I usually say, okay, well then what happened, or what happened to cause this? To me, it's gotta be very clearly defined. Okay. In the second paragraph before the heading of disciplinary consequences, where it says, an equitable and thorough investigation will be carried out. What does equitable mean?
Where are
I
you? I'm
understand.
sorry.
The paragraph, 2 paragraphs above the disciplinary consequences. So still on page 5. I understand what equitable means in terms of curriculum or treatment of one student over another, but what does it mean in terms of an investigation?
I read that as looking at it from multiple perspectives. That's how I read it.
Then can we say,
I hear that, but I think thorough should
Thorough may
cover
cover that, it may,
Right.
yeah.
thorough
I
and
think it's
fair,
implying,
it can be fair.
Yeah, I think it's implying that, are there different students involved, and, is there favoritism, et cetera. I think that's what's implying in that, but.
Then can we say fair? A thorough and fair investigation?
I'm good with what you guys pick on that.
Okay. And then we went to disparate connections. Okay, under training, which is on page 6. The second sentence, the superintendent, the district-wide DAC, and the district professional development team will incorporate training to support blah, blah, blah. Do we have a district professional development team?
We have a professional development committee.
And do we want the professional development committee to be part of this endeavor? I guess so, we'll incorporate
I
training.
think it's helpful.
Okay, so we'll change that wording to the professional development committee.
Well, both in the new teacher orientation and the annual PD?
I'm sorry?
Because it also, in the training part, it also specifies that it's for, the training's gonna happen at every new teacher orientation and annually in PD. Is that the case?
Well, it says as needed.
Is it? Oh, I apologize.
That's okay.
So it
Never
really
mind.
implies that it will be in every
Whenever
new
you guys
teacher.
decide, yes.
So So it's supposed to be at
As
every new teacher orientation, but not necessarily at every PD.
Well, it might not be at the new orientation because that's referenced together.
True, so I need to clarify.
Yeah.
But what is the practice? Happens at new teacher orientation?
We talk about the culture and how we talk to each other, how we talk to kids. So that there is, the tone is clearly set, you know, and what this culture is like.
They don't necessarily get like 5 specific trainings like on DASA. Like they don't, it's not like, okay, here's DASA, this is the student, this is our bullying prevention policy and regulation.
So we do, on our list of GNC training, this topic is covered though as well, right?
On harassment and all those, yeah, and DASA and all that, yep. It's one of the mandatory annual trainings that are required by law.
For new teachers.
For all
For
teachers.
all teachers.
For all
So
teachers.
it shouldn't be as needed. So I will ask for legal clarification then. Okay? Then it says training opportunities will be provided for all staff, including but not limited to cafeteria and hall monitors. And I thought that was strange that they were
Broken
pulling
out.
out cafeteria and hall monitors and not school bus drivers or custodians or.
Right.
And so it's training opportunities would be provided for all staff. Okay, all staff who have contact with students is really it was really all staff who have contact with students. And then when on school property or at school-sponsored events. So this policy applies not only when you're at school, but on the school bus, or up in Canada if the French class from Schreiber is in Canada. It's,
Yeah.
so it's, the language there needed, I thought needs to be clarified that it applies to all staff who have contact with students, whether on school property or school-sponsored events.
That's true.
Okay. And then those were my comments, other than we do not have a staff development policy, so that will come out of the cross-reference. Okay, so that's that, and we will give this, I will ask the questions of the attorney, make the notations as appropriate, also ask the attorney to review the regulations and synthesize. Good? We'll bring this back, hopefully May. Is that okay? Okay, would you like us to skip to policy 1900 so that Dr. Pernick doesn't have to sit here through,
You don't want to hear retention?
through
And
1,
promotion?
2, 3, 4, 5 other policies?
We can. Item 1.6 is very important that we get to today.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can we go back? Only because I think we have stuff in here we're not supposed to have in this training. The district-wide DAC, we don't have that.
No,
Dignity Act Coordinator, we do have.
Okay, so the DAC team, sorry, the last sentence, the DAC teams will be trained. We don't have a
So we have
DAC.
Dignity Act Coordinator for the district, we have a Dignity Act Coordinator in each school.
Right, but this is the DAC team.
Okay, so then all,
Team wouldn't be
individual.
appropriate, you're
so
right.
then all DACs will be trained. Okay, because the coordinator is also doubles as one of the school DACs.
Sure,
Okay. Good catch. Okay.
thank you.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about student serving as ex officio, so is it,
no, was that it? 1.6 is
1.6?
student records, no?
is student serving as ex
On
officio?
the agenda, I just want to make sure we do get to
Oh, I
the
know.
school board member as a student
Sorry.
at some point.
Okay,
So
that's
I
fine.
don't think the work that we need to do with Dr. Pernick's going to take long. So well, I should say hope.
Okay, so let's jump to that then.
Yeah, 53,
Because,
before 1900.
Yeah, we have 5153, which is 1.7, education of homeless children.
I referenced a different pack. I took my stuff from last month.
It's okay.
So my 1.6 is not about to, sorry. I just remembered. So family engagement?
So we're gonna go to 5153, is that okay, Ms. Brooks?
Oh, homeless children?
No,
Yep,
5153 is homeless children.
yes.
Which actually, Mara at BSK said this is her wheelhouse. And so she said she would love to take a look at this,
Okay,
because we do have a NISBA update. And, so unless there was something specific that you wanted to discuss here, or anybody else wanted to discuss, I'm happy just to give it right to council.
Is that the one you
that's
wanted?
great. I think you're aware that the red paragraph there is just something that needed to be added based on the audit, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and that red
So Mara can
paragraph,
have a look at that as well.
did that red paragraph come from the NISBA
It did.
template? Right. Yes, it came from bullet number 1 of the NISBA template. So, I would ask Mara, I think Mara, since it's in the NISBA template, I can't imagine she will delete it. But I'm going to ask her to look at the NISBA template and compare it with our version,
Okay,
and see what she recommends.
great.
Also, I'll just make a note. NISBA's policy number is, what did I say it was? 5151. Our policy number is 5153. But we also have a policy 5151. So we talk about trying to keep our policies numbered in line with NISBA. So we're just gonna have to try to figure out where the current 5151 goes. Maybe change that number to 5151 point something, I don't know.
Sure, that's
But,
fine.
yeah. Okay, so this is Tamara. And then we'll bring that back. From NISBA and the audit. Okay.
All right. And the next item for Dr. Parnick was 1.8 on our agenda, 1900.
Yes.
Can we just give a name? Parent and family engagement.
Parent and family
Thank you.
engagement, yes.
Okay. So this has also been updated by NISBA. Oh, did Dr. Pernick want to say something about that?
Not really.
Oh, okay. This has also been updated by NISBA. Back in 2016. Our version is from 2018. And what was interesting to me is that our version, I don't know if our version from I don't know how we got our version from 2018. It was before my time on the board. By a good year or so. But there's language in the NISBA version that is not in our version of the policy, but might be in our version of the regulation. And so when I ran our policy by NISBA, in the policy department, they noticed that pages 2 and 3 of our regulation really should be addressed in the policy, and that we could think about moving the information on pages 2 and 3 of our regulation into the policy. Or we could leave the policy and the regulation as it is, but be sure to include the regulation in our annual review. In other words, what NISBA is saying to me, a live person NISBA, is that stuff that's in the regulation really should be in the policy.
Okay.
Because it's the policy that requires the annual review. And so my thought was, let's get this to council, our council. Have our council look at our regulation, our policy, and the NISBA sample, and clean that up.
Okay.
And so, in doing that, so I had marked up our policy as compared to the NISBA policy, and was just trying to make everything come together. But what I did notice in our policy, where it says on page 2 of our existing policy, the review of parent and family engagement plan, which I think is what this policy is, which I think my understanding is that the annual review really is about not the words of the policy, but the parent and family engagement plan. Am I wrong? Just correct me if I'm wrong, because then I'll stop my train of thought.
No, I believe you're correct.
The last sentence says, "This may be accomplished by the distribution of an annual survey to the parents and through annual meetings to review data from local benchmarks and New York State assessments." We have been having annual curriculum meetings that review data from the New York State assessments. So in terms of an audit, I don't know if that helps, because that has been done for the past at least 2 years, and maybe even before that. I think Dr. Westervelt did it
Yes, you would do it too.
a couple of times. I think Dr. Maioli did it. So in terms of the audit, I don't know if that's information that's beneficial and helpful to you, Dr. Pernick, because we are having public review of at least the New York State assessments. Local benchmarks, I know we've talked about Regents exams. I don't know if those are the local benchmarks. And we also have surveys that go out now. We're treating everybody in the district equally in terms of the surveys. We're not targeting only
True.
parents in Title I schools. So,
Can I pause on that
yes,
comment?
yes.
Did you hear back? Because the last time we met was about this, the surveys being not specific enough to Title I.
We've already resubmitted
Okay.
documents to the reviewer. We'll hear back information the end of April. But I suspect that we will meet the standard of the review.
That's great.
Because that was something we asked him at the last meeting was, are the surveys specific enough to those Title I schools? Because it's district-wide survey, it's not specific just to whatever building receives it.
Right. And also, I don't know if it helps you to submit the fact that we have been annually reviewing the data from the New York State assessments. That was public.
The review asked that we submit documentation that the policy is reviewed. And so the policy was reviewed, so that's what we submitted. The reviewer doesn't have, like, the standard only says review. It doesn't
Okay.
say update, doesn't say anything else.
Okay. So then, as part of this review, we will give this to council to synthesize, the same way we did with the special education policies, where sometimes they had to synthesize, excuse me, the regulations and eliminate redundancy. Okay. Do we agree on that plan?
I agree on that plan, I just have one
Excuse me.
question
Sorry.
for the committee. So I didn't have this question before because it was in the email from NISBA that is referenced in our notes. So when she replied back, I think it's a she, when she replied
Jessica
back, yeah,
Goldstein.
Jessica, when she replied back, she listed the whole, what we will do, but it's not listing the how, but she mentioned the advisory board. So my only question was gonna be, because it's referenced in this sample, right now it's committee, the word is committee listed in our policy, but she wrote this could be, like the effectiveness. She said that there's an advisory board that districts use to review the effectiveness of this policy and just overall Title I schools. I'm wondering from administration, from the committee, our thoughts on an advisory board or committee, not just a survey. She did say, but you could do it through a survey or other methods, but she started that sentence with advisory board. So I'm just wondering how other districts handle it. I know that this policy is important right now, timeline for what you needed from us and what was needed to get done, but it's still a really important policy to review overall. So because of her email back, I'm just wondering the thoughts on an actual advisory board. I know we're doing what is legally required, right? A survey is legally required. A review is legally required. When this was brought last month, I had so many questions, but I knew what the intention of that meeting was, to just get what you needed that day to move forward, but it got brought back and you already submitted that. So really, for me, for this policy, I don't feel like, again, I'll wait to see what the attorneys bring back, but one of the things that they might bring back is they're gonna list advisory board or survey or X, Y, and Z. I think it's gonna be up to the district administration, on like, how do we really work on this for our Title I schools? And reading through this, I was like, I know you said that we get the assessments, but I don't really see it broken down ever in a Title I discussion to us, right? That I've yet to see like really a Title I discussion to us of like, by the way, these are our Title I schools. Maybe it's up to me as a trustee to just always remember which ones are our Title I schools, but I don't feel like we ever like truly compare building to building, or when they are discussing like the assessment of how are the schools doing, what do they mean in reference to what? In comparison to what? So that's the data that I haven't seen to know. Are we talking about New York State standards? Like, because we see that, right? They'll list.
Review, what does
Yeah,
review?
what is the review and what data is it looking for? And maybe that's why an advisory committee is kind of important for this. And I don't know what extent it's worked on now, right? Like, I know you handle clearly any of the complaints happening and bringing it in, but I didn't know what extent, you know, I said I was at one of those buildings, never heard about it. I think I'm at another one of those buildings, still haven't heard about it. So the consistency is just, it's hard for me as a trustee to understand the nature of this policy and how to be more effective with it, because those are important buildings. All buildings are important, but does any of that make sense?
Yeah. I think I understand part of your question. So you should know that there's an annual meeting that takes place of representatives from the Title I schools, and then community members as well that attend that annual meeting. That's a requirement for the Title I funding.
Right.
And it's at that point where we review what the Title I funds are used for and how we are expecting them to impact learning in those Title I schools. And then it opens up a dialogue between all the different constituents that are in attendance at that. So there's administration there, there's parents there, there's community groups there. So that is done annually, that's required. But of course, then on top of that, we are looking at assessment data. How are those schools doing compared to our non-Title I schools? That is an important component as well.
How is it disseminated information to be part of that annual review?
Is it disseminated? I mean, how are people invited to the
Yeah.
review?
Sorry.
I would share.
No, I got
You got your water.
I'm
Yeah.
fully medicated
You're-
and hydrated. We send out invitations, usually through the principals. We seek out constituents. Every constituency is represented, from administrators, teachers, parents, expressly parents from Title I schools. Paraprofessionals are included in that. Students from the high school are included in that too. There's a board representative, I think, on that meeting, but I have to look back at my notes. It's it's a Zoom meeting. It's coming up on May 14th. We're going to send out invitations next week before break. But that's how it goes out.
Would the committee be, I mean, I can bring this up at new business. I can bring it up at new business, but it would, if a board member is not invited, I may bring that up to a new business for a board member to be invited to that meeting. That would be a new business, right?
Not
Full
sell
board?
out.
Would that be a new business? Okay. Procedurally, not policy, that's nothing to do with policy. New business, sounds good, let me
Yeah,
make a note.
just let
But-
the officers know that that's what you want to do, so no surprises, and
Have either of you, prior to this year, been invited to such a meeting?
never heard of the meeting. Truth be told.
Annual. So, and then, I'll take it. Then if we are invited, if the full board is in agreement to attend, then I don't have any other questions, because they probably would come up as in that meeting.
Dr. Purdick will check the list of attendees
I will.
and confirm back to us.
No, please don't, I would really appreciate to bring it up to new business first, because if the full board does not want to be a rep in that one, then that is not needed, then it just would be, at that point, okay.
I don't know what's required. I don't know if a board member is required to be there. I can't imagine that that's the case, but I haven't read anything that says a board member must be part of it.
I don't know. I have to look.
You mentioned that sometimes a board member is invited, that's why.
I seem to remember But yes.
Maybe they were a
But there's-
parent
It's a big
before.
miss, 35 people, you know,
Yeah.
I don't remember everybody.
Okay.
That was my
Okay, so
question,
this
was
is
the
going off-
advisory, yep.
It's going off to the attorneys with the homeless. And this, I guess we have to agree is a, within the meaning of state law. Yes,
I thought that was part of, the yeah, that was.
That was it, right?
Special
That's
education.
it.
it was, but it
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
applies-
Carnick.
Yes.
Pleasure to be
applies
here.
equally.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
you. You feel better.
Thank you. Go Mets.
Okay, back to our regularly scheduled agenda, okay. 4750, or do you want to get to the student ex officio?
Either is fine.
Okay, because it's almost 11 o'clock.
So yeah, why don't we get to the
Yeah, let's do
student,
that.
the student on the board?
Because we have a legal mandate.
We do, and we have a
This one.
timeline that we can make sure we meet.
That's right.
Let's do that.
Okay, so just as a bit of background, when the board met on March 11th, we discussed what we wanted this policy to look like. We were asked questions about the qualifications of the student. I'm not going to rehash that now because time is of the essence, but how the student will be selected, will there be an alternate? Do we want them to have to come over the summer, so forth and so on. And so all of that information is going to be synthesized into our policy as appropriate. I think the question for the board right now, for the committee right now is, you have two samples in front of you. You have the attorney sample and you have the NISBA sample. And so the first question is, do we prefer one sample over the other? Do we want to synthesize the language in the samples? So that's the first thing, since we're creating a brand new policy. I know what I feel, but if the two of you would like to go ahead, please do.
Go ahead.
I'm okay to hear what you feel.
Okay. I prefer the NISBA sample, but I have some language, minor language in our policy, in the attorney's policy that I would like to add into it. So for example, the first paragraph of the overview in the attorney policy, I would like to add to the first paragraph in the NISBA sample. So the first sentence, it would read like this: "The Board of Education believes it is important to include students' voices in its deliberations." And then I would take out the rest of that paragraph because it's redundant of what's on page 2 of the NISBA policy. And I would add the first half of the first paragraph from the attorney sample. And obviously, after this is synthesized, you'll see it all redlined, to discuss the value of having a student on the board. There's a part of me that says, well, it's nice that we value it, but we're also being required to do it by law. So we can talk nicely about it, that's great, but we're also required by law. So that's what I would take from the attorney sample. And then basically just keep just about everything that's in the NISBA sample, other than the stuff that doesn't apply to us, like the BOCES stuff. So that's what I would do. I like the language that's in the attorney version about the term. It's very succinct. The student will serve for a term of 1 year, commencing here. Attendance at board meetings is not expected during July and August, but they can come if they want. So that's how I would synthesize it, because I think there isn't a lot for us to do here in terms of creating a policy, because it's very straightforward, other than putting in the requirements that we have. It's going to be a senior. We will have an alternate. It will be chosen by the student body, facilitated by the Schreiber principal. They may request to participate in meetings remotely. That's already NISBA language. They may be excused to leave meetings early upon the approval of the board president. We had actually said we wanted attendance required until 9:30 p.m. So, because that's what the board decided, I will put that language in, but also keep may be excused to leave meetings early upon the approval of the board president. So
I I think that's fair, because even if any of us were to be feeling not so well during a board
We
meeting,
can leave.
we can leave. We
We
don't
don't even
actually need
ask.
permission.
We just
So I think,
Farewells.
yeah.
So long, farewell.
Is there a legal amount of time required by a board trustee to be counted as attending a meeting?
You mean once they're there?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that.
I've never heard.
I mean, I think that if you are sick or you have an emergency, you have to leave. I don't know the answer. I'm not even gonna
Yeah.
make up an answer. I'm
I
not
think
gonna
it's
answer.
the question of, I think the rule is you can't miss 3 in a row or something like
Yeah,
that.
but like if I show up and then I left.
Right.
An
Is
excuse.
that,
Is that considered
one of those three?
attending? Right.
So the
If
reason
I
I
were a
asked.
lawyer, I would argue it's a good faith effort to attend. You're sick, you need to leave, you tried, but I'm not. the one who
Yeah,
decides.
so that's why I would definitely put in language for a minor
Yeah.
to be allowed to leave.
That's why I thought the way it was written was fine. Ex officio student members may request to participate in meetings remotely and may be excused to leave meetings early upon the approval of the board president. I personally think that's.
Yes, but we were told by the full board, we agreed that it would be 9:30. So I feel responsible to put that in, and then we can bring that up to the full board to
Women
ask.
excused?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel it's not our place as 3 people. I mean,
No,
I know we're
agreed,
supposed to make recommendations, and we could probably recommend that we don't agree with it, but the full board agreed. So
Yep, no, I get
I
it.
don't feel,
I don't think we discussed like the ability to leave, like no one brought up if they're feeling sick, can they leave at that moment? So I think it's fair to list it, and then it goes on for review anyways, so they would be seeing it. But I do agree that 9:30 should be listed, that was agreed upon.
yes, yeah. And then at the very end of the NISBA sample, and I'm gonna try to make headers and reorganize this language, because I feel like unfortunately the NISBA sample is all over the place and isn't really laying it out really clearly. The very last paragraph says, superintendent is responsible for arranging an orientation and training program. So I don't know what that means, because board members are required by law to attend training programs that are sponsored. I guess, I don't know if we're required to attend the NISBA training programs, but we are required to have training within 1 year of taking office. Fortunately, NISBA provides that somewhere around Nassau or Suffolk County, and we go to that. I don't know what it means where it says the superintendent or designee is responsible for arranging an orientation. I understand. Training, I don't. I don't know what that's supposed to look like, because the superintendent has never had to do that for a run-of-the-mill board member, let alone a student. I don't know if that should be, and I don't know if this is.
In the notes of the NISBA, it says training of ex officio student board members is not addressed in the law, but we believe it is good practice to provide.
Yes, and it's saying in this last sentence that the superintendent is responsible for or designate, is responsible for the orientation and training. I almost feel as though it should be the board president.
When I read that, I pictured the student coming to the superintendent's office and then having a meeting and an understanding of how the board calendar works, what their role will be, how people take turns talking, the board president recognizes people when they want to talk, the flow of the general agenda. That's what I was picturing when I read it.
And so I guess the question really is, the board meeting is for the board to conduct board business. And it's important to have the superintendent at the table, but the meeting is run by the board president. And when we do training, it's completely separate from the superintendent. I guess you just naturally assume we've done our training, but we don't report to you about that. We don't.
Right.
And when we have a new board member, what we try to do as existing board members is to onboard that new board member, to say, we're a resource, we're here for you if you have questions. If you don't want to ask us questions, that's fine, but pick our brains, ask us questions, don't be shy. At least that's been my perspective. I know your perspective, and So I don't understand why it's the superintendent. I guess we can decide. I think the board president or the officers are responsible for personally, I think it's the officers who are responsible for arranging orientation, and I would say, and onboarding, as opposed to a training program.
So my only comment as a new trustee, this summer I did request a meeting with all assistant superintendents this year. So I got, obviously, like, met with all of you, and officers gave any logistics with, like, tracker, like, just board docs. I did meet with Denise, who explained board docs. She did really the logistics one with me on board docs, on my email account, and everything. But after that, I had asked to meet with everyone to understand the process. So I did meet with all assistant superintendents and superintendent, just to understand each committee, like the nature of what the committee was gonna be like, with how your role is with policy committee, because I know you did policy, with Dr. Feeney with curriculum, and so on. And then Miss Manuel did the budget, like, process with me. I found it helpful. I can't remember if I brought it up at board development in the summer or in one of the exec, but at a
You brought up an exec, and it's confidential, don't say it.
It's not confidential.
Okay, I heard exec.
At a NISBA event, I might have by accident said an exec because I didn't know where to say it, but at a NISBA event, the June, like a June NISBA event, new trustees are invited, and some of the things that they mentioned is like onboarding. I said that I had like met with the Baldwin trustee who had been there for years, and they have like a huge onboarding process for trustees. So all summer I was like, am I gonna get that onboarding thing that everyone's talking about? I was like really toying with like how to bring this up. Plus, I still don't know like what was the most efficient way for a new trustee to like really be brought in on the process, aside from learn on the fly and, you know, as questions come up, obviously ask any trustee as it came up. But I think for a student to have like those 15, 20 minutes with each assistant superintendent to kind of understand a little bit on that dynamic, I think that wasn't like very beneficial for me. But again, I think that can be a full board discussion possibly. I didn't meet as much with the officers, possibly with the president, just to kind of say like logistics of like, okay, this is the timeline of like everything, so.
So that's the substance of the training, as opposed to who is going to arrange it. So personally, I think the board officers and the superintendent are responsible for arranging the orientation and training program.
Arranging.
Is it training or orientation?
You can say orientation and onboarding, it's whatever you want to call it. You want to call it onboarding?
They didn't no offense, Dr. Shields, you didn't train me in anything that day, so yeah, so the word.
It was a very nice conversation,
Yes.
back and forth, it
Yeah.
really
We
was.
can do onboarding.
Yeah.
And the superintendent and Board of Education will establish procedures to implement. That's what I think. Or you can say the superintendent and the Board of Education. I think Dr. Shields shouldn't have to go at this alone.
Yeah.
Whoever's in the superintendent's spot, you know, years down the road. I really feel it's incumbent upon the board to make sure that this student becomes a fully functional member of the board to the extent that the law allows. Okay, so do we want the Board of Education to work with the superintendent, or the board officers on behalf of the Board of Education?
I'm fine with officers.
Great. Okay. So, my suggestion then, well, first of all, I didn't ask anybody else. say about these policies, other than
No, you did.
synthesizing our information. No, I
We
said what I
We
liked.
wanted you to go first, so
All right.
I think you covered it all, I think.
I just have one question,
Yeah.
because you are gonna work on synthesizing the two, so I couldn't find it in the, I quickly tried to scan, but then we talked. In the attorney one is the one I read more. At the bottom, it said something about an interview process, regardless of which one you ended up with, as like the actual way to decide on the student. All of them still said like an interview process, so I was just gonna recommend that be removed, because no such thing is actually needed
Correct.
in the route that we're going.
Correct.
Okay.
And it was actually going to be the school principal who was going to determine how this is happening. In other words, set up the process for it. And if the
election.
school
For
principal,
candidates and the election.
yeah, if the
I
school,
I don't think we just, go ahead, finish your sentence.
no, we had said that somewhere I wrote in my email, that Dr. Bear would facilitate and coordinate. Yeah,
Yeah.
we said, what is the selection process? And said Dr. Bear will facilitate, coordinate.
So-
How will the student be selected? By the Schreiber student body.
But an actual interview application, that wasn't something we discussed.
We didn't get into the details of it.
Correct.
So that would be
There's no so far as we know,
no interview
there's no
process.
interview process necessary.
So that's the
far
only
as
reason
we
I said
know.
to remove that
Yes.
part.
Yep.
That was my only question.
Right, so I didn't even say that.
Because
I
you
didn't-
were synthesizing both, and I was like.
Yeah, I was just synthesizing what I liked into here and not talking about
Perfect,
what
I didn't like that one, so
didn't like
great,
that.
does make it.
Yes, yes. And again, so far as I know, I don't know that Dr. Bear is going to require an interview. We're kind of leaving that process up to her.
Yeah.
Okay, so, because time is of the essence, does everybody feel comfortable with me working with the attorneys to the extent necessary to synthesize these two documents and putting it on for a first read? And working off that first read if we have any issues, and then bring it back if we need to, and then keeping it rolling forward for the adoption? So we stay on time? Okay, great. First read. Awesome. Okay, so we covered that. Do we want to tackle,
Retention.
do we want to look at extreme heat days?
Can we, because I am, if this is a status update, it says status update,
Yes.
which meant we weren't working on it necessarily. So what were we planning to do?
So what I wanted to share with the group is that in speaking to the attorney, she said, it's really great that you have this on the agenda now. It shows good faith in trying to comply with a law that is coming. The law may be tweaked or revised down the road. It's already being tweaked and revised because the legislature understands that there are serious budgetary components to making schools habitable during extreme heat days. There's many, right?
Oh, I was talking about promotion and retention.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But let's just keep going, I'll pull it out.
Okay, and that there's a tension between closing an entire school because one classroom is above the heat limit, but maybe because it's on the third floor, but the other classrooms are fine, or there's another classroom that has air conditioning and they're fine, and you can have one class go remote while the other kids are in school, and if you have to close a whole school, what does that mean, and the 180-day, and so there are a whole lot of questions, a whole lot of uncertainty right now, and so the attorney advised me to share, have it on your agenda, show that you have it on your radar, but wait a month or two for this to be finalized, for the law really to be finalized and settled, because there are a lot of unintended negative consequences to following this law. I hate to say it that way, but that's the case. So.
Or they could properly fund our schools and then we don't have to worry about these things.
Right, this is basically one of the biggest unfunded mandates ever. Especially in districts such as ours, where we have two buildings that were really the beginning of the last century. Weber and Daly were built not for this heat, and before there was the 180-day rule and all this kind of stuff. And the transom windows were still in use, and there wasn't global warming, and blah, 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 blah. So, any comments about just having this here, keep it on our radar, wait until everything settles? Is that okay?
I would say that
Yes.
the draft that has been created
Yes,
is, I believe, in very good shape.
yes.
So as soon as you're ready to put it on for first read, I don't believe there's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
So I think you're ready to do that when wished.
Yes. The only thing I would say is there are some optional paragraphs here. Like the one about the air conditioners were available. My sense is to just kind of bring it back before we put it on for a first read. I understand what you're saying, but just bring it back to decide what we're doing about the optional paragraphs. And that optional language was taken out, the attorney took all that optional language it's usually in gray, shaded gray in the NISPA sample. So you can see it in the NISPA sample, the shaded gray. Maybe we'll just add that back in where it says optional paragraphs, but if I'm still chair when this is coming back, my recommendation would be to bring it back to deal with the optional paragraphs first.
I agree with that. My assumption is there's gonna be more added or deleted that we have to look at anyways.
Okay. Should we try to go into promotion and retention?
Well, that's where I thought we were, that's
Okay.
why I started
So
with,
yes.
if we have enough time, because I have a lot to say about this policy, and it says status update, and I wasn't sure who we were getting the update from and why, so.
Okay.
But I don't think we ever discussed it, because you were adding, because the teachers, someone wanted to add something or edit something.
Dr. Allen,
Oh,
it had already gone through the middle school and the high school teachers.
I didn't remember it being Dr. Allen, but I don't think I ever talked about it.
Dr. Allen was here, and it was something about the middle school, which has been changed. So I thought we had questions about Weber.
So the language that was changed, the middle school, what was in the middle school was already there. What's in the blue for middle school and for the high school, I believe is what we had, I thought the last time. No?
Due to my old age, did we actually discuss this in the fall of this policy?
Yes.
Yes,
It's okay. It's all right, yeah, from our.
May
I
there's too
kept-
many, you can't get.
I made you.
I
It
kept my
just-
copy from October. In October, see this is middle school?
Got it.
It's,
Okay.
it's the exact same, and from high school.
So
it's the
blue
same.
line is new?
The red line is new, and the special considerations for students with
That's
disabilities.
Well, I knew
is
that
what
because I
is
saw that
new.
in the note.
And even that has been reworked since we received this policy. Because what was added in the blue for students with a disability was about placement. And when I read it, I reached out to Dr. Allen and I said, the policy is about promotion and retention,
Yeah,
not,
which I was confused on
Placement.
why this was added here.
yes. So this version of these edits had already been printed for our packets. And the addition, the change was made, I want to say Wednesday night at 9:30 at night.
Yeah, but last night I read it, it was still said
Yes,
something.
yes,
of this nature.
because it
Okay.
was in the comment, if you look at the comment
yeah.
section, that's where the change has been made.
Okay,
So.
are we reviewing it?
I have,
We can,
I have
up
a
until
very,
that point.
very high-level question, and then I think I need to understand that first before we move on. Is this required?
I would have to check if it's required. I would think it is, but I would have to confirm that
I
for you.
don't have a list of our required policies here. Okay.
I have so many issues with this policy. I feel like from a practical point of view, it doesn't read as if we're looking at students where they are, and it's putting them into these grade level. It talks about, it sounds like we have rules about grade level and moving up and down, and then it sounds like we don't in the same policy because we're supposed to look at each student. So I feel like there's a whole lack of consistency in so much of this policy that doesn't seem like it's
draft.
usable.
The
Yes.
draft, okay, because we do have a policy on the books that is not the draft.
Okay,
Yes.
which is
So-
why I was confused, because even the title is odd in this one.
Well, that's why we changed the title.
Right.
I remember we had a long conversation about acceleration.
So you may prefer the language we have versus what's in the draft. So I just wanted to,
It is required. On NISBA sample, it says it's required.
yeah, there we go.
I don't have the NISBA sample.
This is probably because I just keep on my old pages.
Oh, okay. So I'm only working from ours and this acceleration thing, so I don't even have that in front of me.
The law requires districts to notify parents of its policy on promotion, including how its policy was developed. So
Okay.
anyway, it's a required policy.
Okay, so that's
And
why I'm
much of the
feeling
language,
not useful, because I don't have that in front of me. So
much of
I
the
apologize.
language comes from the NISBA template, and we really massaged it. I don't know if you remember, we reordered the paragraphs, because it would, sadly, the NISBA template was all over the place.
Okay, so that's not helpful, in other words.
Well,
I don't remember going from the NISBA template, so see,
it was not this year, it was last year, so you weren't
Oh,
even here for that.
okay. Okay,
If it's helpful, we can bring this back next month. I don't want you to feel pressured for time.
well, I'm feeling, it wasn't in the packet, the NISBA one, so I guess that's why I fell off the,
Probably because the NISBA one was from literally like last year.
okay.
That we looked at it, and I don't want to speak for Javi, but I'm guessing that it's because it was already dealt with, and we're now in the final drafting version,
Okay.
but we can certainly
I am
bring
not
it back to
feeling
you.
prepared to look at this. I have so many problems with what we currently have as 4750, two versions of 4750 at this point.
Well, only because we have the draft, so what
Right.
happened was last year, where are we, 24, 25? 23, 24, we started on this policy.
Forget it.
I have,
This has been in the works for a long time.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, we're not getting very far, because
Yeah.
this
Well, we've
is-
gotten very far on a lot of policies,
Yeah,
not this one.
not this one, that's what I
Not
meant.
this one.
Not this one.
because
Okay.
Just to confirm,
Because it had to go to different people. It had
Yes,
to go to
yes,
middle
yes,
school, it had to go to the
yes.
high school.
so
Yes.
last year you worked on it with NISBA sample and
Yes.
created this one.
Correct.
And at this
Through
point,
the policy, not, it was
yeah,
through
no,
the committee.
well, not me, but
Yeah.
last committee,
When Rachel
last year's
was here,
committee.
Yes,
So this was created with the NISBA
Yes.
sample. Yeah, I don't have the NISBA sample. I don't need the NISBA sample. I went off just on this. I did see the acceleration, the current one, which I will just say, because I know you said they might like this one. This one does not feel at all like a Miss Malconi and Brooks
it's a
type
terrible,
of
it's
policy.
1990,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. So I don't think this,
1993.
I don't think
Lots happened
this would
since
be
then.
anything that you guys would
No.
like to reference.
No.
So
No.
I'm okay waiting.
sorry.
I did have questions on it, so that's why I was like, I didn't realize we talked about it in the fall also. But I'm okay to wait on my questions, so if you wanna.
We can bring it back next month.
I'm sorry,
It's okay.
I really need to look at the NISBA policy again, 'cause
Okay. We even tried to add some of our philosophy in it. It's like, I just have my scribbles on it from,
I was gonna say, this sounds very much like,
we had our hands on it.
correct.
We had our hands on it.
Does not sound very NISBA.
Right, but it also, so, do you want to share some of your concerns? So that when we bring it back, some of it maybe can be cleaned up a bit? Or is it,
if you, yeah, okay. I don't love paragraph 2 for so many reasons.
okay, what district curriculum guides indicate goals for achievement by the average student at grade level?
Average in quotes, like,
Yeah,
that's
that's
just
from the
all.
NISBA template.
It's,
That whole paragraph is NISBA, okay?
however, academic growth, like physical growth, does not take place at the same time. Certain students may achieve mastery in a shorter period while others need additional time. early identification and intervention, promotion and retention are methods used to meet the needs of
Children, it should be children, not such children, but children. But go ahead.
or students, but yes.
You want students?
Yes. So that introductory sentence just completely rubs me the wrong way, and it again gets to this problem that I'm having, which is boxing kids into grades and then saying, no, but if you don't meet the grade, because we're looking at you as an individual, then we're going to provide. It's all crisscrossing for me, and I don't know how to resolve that.
Okay, can we then delete the first sentence completely? Because I don't know
Okay.
why we have to say it.
Yes.
And then start the paragraph with academic growth, like physical growth, does not take place at the same place or time for all individuals. Is it even
Yes.
necessary?
I agree, but then the majority of the policy after that does not recognize that belief,
Okay.
is my problem.
So then.
Am I making
then-
any sense?
Then as a practical matter, when we are grading, when teachers are grading students, then it's really the first sentence that's the most relevant as opposed to the rest of it. Because this is grades, you're not, my understanding, having been through the system as a student and having had a child as a student, is that you're not graded based on fuzzy stuff. There are rubrics, there are ways to measure. And so, and the rubrics are based on they're based on something, I don't know what the word is, but they have to be based on something concrete, not arbitrary. And so, I guess the question is, do we need the paragraph at all? Does the paragraph make everything confusing? Because we're trying to explain to parents, really, it's really not about the students necessarily who are getting the A, because it's kind of tautological that they're going to advance, they're going to be promoted. This is really about what is happening when your child is at risk or in danger of not being promoted and therefore being retained. So, to me, that's what this is about.
Okay.
What are the mechanics so that parents can understand? Yeah, we value the children, it's all nice and well, good, but there are very stark mechanics
Right.
to.
So that's what I'm saying.
Having
How do we marry the stark requirements with talking about students as individuals who may need academic services, et cetera? I just want to make sure that we're not confusing parents by saying, we see each student as an individual and we can help them along, but nope, here's the rules and the guidelines. So
I didn't feel that when I read the whole document.
Okay.
Maybe in that one sentence, because the word average is used. When you read the whole document, literally the next paragraph is the early identification and intervention. It speaks about RTI, it speaks about building level supports. It does state, as soon as it's noticed of a failing, which I have a question on the word failing, but on a failing, that what is the instructional support team, what is going to be the steps? So I personally really didn't read that from this document. I'm not opposed to any edits on the first two paragraphs so that the board philosophy comes through. I don't have any changes myself on those first two paragraphs. I think that you guys this year have worked really well to get that philosophy across on documents you've already worked on. But I don't think you can ever have a perfect first sentence, to be honest. I think what's really important is the whole next part of this document for the retention part.
I mean, we can delete that entire paragraph. Does anything in that paragraph have any substantive importance?
Well, again, I feel like this is reading in two very different ways, and I don't know how to reconcile that. So that's.
I think I'm because this is legally required, I'm thinking that this is something that parents need to understand the process of what is happening with their children in the classroom if their child is struggling or whatever the reason, not being able to get to the next level.
So maybe the problem is that we have promotion and retention in the same policy, which is probably why this gets muddy to me.
Well, I think the philosophy of meeting a child where they're at is on both ends, though. So like,
Oh, yeah.
so maybe just a sentence on the development, that like, how the development is different for every student. That is a retention and promotion philosophy. Like, you are meeting the student. There is none of this average part of it. Like, I'm okay with removing that word, because the word average doesn't even apply to any of this. Because if you're the average student, you are not being retained and you're not being promoted, right? So for me, I understand why that would be all one document. The concept of you may need to move up a grade or you may need to move down a grade is the same philosophy, that you have to have standards in place to be able to either promote a student who is above this average or to retain a student who's not meeting that average. So I don't see it being needed to be separated documents, but I do think the way it's laid out of being separate notes on those logistics part of it is required, which they did in this.
Okay, so already it's 11:30, and I feel like this is gonna require a lot of my mind.
Okay, all right, so then we'll bring it back. And maybe we can speak, if there's something, I guess we really shouldn't speak offline about it. Okay, we should do everything here. I would just say, the last time we were here, I have a note, and I think it was Ms. Mawani who said, with the early identification intervention, are we including mental health personnel and guidance counselors in any of these decisions? So I made a note there that I thought that should be explored.
So some of them reference the school psychologist.
School psychologist, yes, it does. It does.
Talks about the instructional support team.
And then now it says the instructional support team, yes, okay. So,
All right, I'm sorry to
It's
be a
okay.
problem. I will go look at the
fine.
NISBA and remind myself of how we got here.
but one of, yeah, and if I can find the minutes from the first meeting, but one of the notes I also had was, one of the comments we made back, was the process language in terms of how parents are notified needs to be very clear in the policy. So, Dr. Shields, if I could just ask you to read through the policy and make sure that the process language is very clear. That would be helpful.
I just had because it's going back and just because it was edits, I think that you added something about the risk, doubling up on the terminology somewhere.
Yes, because one was the attorney had written in danger of failing, and I said, but right above that, we say at risk of failing.
Yeah.
So why are we mixing the two?
So
it's
the-
at risk of.
Okay, so I'm fine with being consistent. The question is the word failing.
Failing.
So the word failing, I'm not opposed to the word failing. It is something that happens in life. Failure happens. It's healthy sometimes. I'm wondering though, we have that spot where it ends up being elementary, middle school, high school, and being very specific with the three. However, I've never heard the word failing in elementary school. So my only question, if the committee was okay, was I couldn't understand what metric or rubric with the word failing,
Yeah.
at risk of failing, is really with the elementary school. Is it going by state test scores?
No.
Is it going by, the whatever universal screener we're doing? Like, what are we going by for the elementary?
Maybe
Middle
not meeting expectations or whatever the language is for
that didn't
elementary
felt
school.
where that was too vague. That one was the only vague, and maybe it's intentional because elementary is not as much standardized testing. that you would see in like more middle school, high school, where those are very defined. High school was the 2 credits. The middle school was whatever amount of subjects, right?
Right.
So the elementary, I like that you made that edit, but I was like, this failing word, I don't understand
Yep.
for the elementary.
So can we clarify, Dr. Shields, what does failing mean? What would be the reason to retain an elementary school? What, it's not really, you're right, you're not failing.
Pass
in
all
elementary.
subjects.
Can you point me to the word failing in an elementary section?
Well, it's not,
It's
it's
under early
referenced.
intervention, early identification and intervention.
So it's used as a, like a header for like the overall sentiment of failing, and that's when the instructional support team gets involved.
Yeah.
And then the elementary school will state that its students who pass all subject will be promoted to the next grade level. But
Who do not make satisfactory progress, or who do not make necessary, or not
so we're
making
going by
necessary
report
progress.
card, the report cards where it's like the 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers, like that was just confusing to me on the elementary schools of what is a pass on a subject. So page 2.
In other words, at what point does an elementary school student
Not pass. And what are they passing?
Right.
or need the
And-
early
And
intervention?
if they're retained, isn't there usually this entire intervention process
Well-
that brings them to being identified and receiving support services? So we don't really
That is-
retain students, do we?
Hardly ever.
But that's referenced,
Hardly
just so you
ever.
know.
But it's when a student is really struggling, and then there's a lengthy conversation with families about possible retention. But it's
Do we-
very, very rare.
I thought it was not at all, because then they wind up receiving support services and being evaluated, et cetera.
But they
So
can still be retained, though. So if, I mean, not to, sorry, but like, I know a student who does receive services, who did get the support, who did get multiple supports, was retained.
At the same time. Okay, I've never.
After
heard
the fact.
This.
Like, the support was in the place, yep.
Wasn't
And-
sufficient, and then they were retained.
And I think that's something, maybe not as common in Port Washington, but like, it is something that occurs, and I would say even common at early ages of elementary school, just,
Yes,
so
but
I think
typically,
a policy is important for that reference.
Okay, so we'll try to flesh that out, and then we'll bring it back.
okay, sorry to
No, it's okay.
cause such a ruckus.
That's okay. Okay, sorry to keep everybody late. Community comments?
Yes.
Sorry,
so
overtime,
yeah,
I'm
One
joking.
final note. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I guess we'll start from the beginning, or rather, the first one is really just a comment about that paragraph on page 3 of policy 0115,
Student
harassment
harassment.
and bullying.
Mm-hmm.
That paragraph in question that starts, the district shall ensure, the third paragraph in the prevention section.
The optional
that's sort of
paragraph.
Under discussion.
Mhm.
I think just a point of context that may be helpful as you go back to the attorneys on this. All of that language is taken directly from New York State Education Law, section 801A. So that may be a reason why the attorney suggested including it, but it could also be handled in a more streamlined way with reference to the law. It goes back to the Dignity Act for all students, to SEPA, the Children's Internet Protection Act, and the instructional and curricular requirements associated with those. So
And isn't it interesting that NISBA doesn't have the reference to it? I see education law, and I don't see, okay. So.
just a consideration as you think about whether that needs to be in there or
Yep.
can come out,
Yep.
just a little asterisk
Yep.
there, may do the trick. Regarding policy 4750, promotion and retention, a couple of questions. In the, I'm just pulling it up. In the second paragraph, it starts, district curriculum guides indicate goals for achievement. What are district curriculum guides and where can the community access them?
Can I just make a comment? Sorry,
Yeah.
not to interrupt. We didn't review this policy. right? Like, we,
4750,
promotion and retention?
yeah.
I didn't finish like 1,000 of my questions.
Right, no, we didn't, no, it's
So
coming back.
I
It's
respect
in
any
the packet,
questions.
and
Yeah, no,
when
I
you bring
totally
it back.
understand. The only reason is because if we get community comments on it, I'd like an ability to still have my,
Oh, yeah.
we still will have a review of it, maybe
100%.
bring back any response
Yeah.
to any questions.
I'm not
asked right
expecting
now.
any responses immediately.
Because
These are just
technically, that was one of the
questions.
sentences we just spent 20 minutes on, so that's the only reason why. Okay.
Yes, and as you bring this back, things to consider from a community perspective, what are the curriculum guides and how can the community access them? And how do those relate to the academic standards on page 2 that can only be received upon request? It says, under academic standards, written standards for student progress at each grade level are available to parents, guardians, and others upon request.
Written standards for student progress. Or written standard for student progress, and then the other is the curriculum guide.
Presumably, those are the rubrics that determine a student's progression, any student's progression, right? So assuming those are not individual to each student and are standard for all students, the question is, well, A, how do they relate to the district curriculum guides? And why are they only available upon request? Why are they not made available to the community so that all parents know what the standards are?
That
for
was
progression?
actually a question that I had for the attorney, and I said, can we also include it in the student handbook, on the website, et cetera?
Yes.
So that's just, we haven't gotten there, but
Got it, okay,
Are
so I'm
you-
ahead.
are you able, Dr. Shields, to explain what the district curriculum guide is and what the written standards for student progress are? Or do you want to come back with that?
Let's come back with that.
Okay.
Yes.
And my third and final question on this is, with respect to promotion and retention, is there a corresponding policy regarding new student placement based on whatever these guides and rubrics are for new students coming into the district who may not have had access to sustained education, who may not have the skills our district associates with their age or developmental level in terms of their placement when they enter, which then affects their progression, promotion, and potential retention. So,
Okay, so your question is
there a policy
new
on
student placement
is
policy?
there a new student placement policy that corresponds to this and might be referenced within it?
I think that goes both ways then, not just on the retention level,
Yes, on the
on the promotion.
on the
level.
promotion level as well.
Which is generally, is there a new student?
Yeah, which I think you were getting.
Okay. I see no other community members, so there are no other questions. With that, we will adjourn. Our next meeting date is May 16th. I am assuming that is at 10 a.m. Let me just double check on my calendar. It is? Yes.
The June meeting's at 9 in the morning.
The June meeting, okay. So yes, so at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful spring break, I'm thinking, right? Wonderful, restful spring break. We will be hard at work here at Policy. And we'll see you back in June. May. May.
Thank you.
June is 9 o'clock. I did not have that written down.
Can I ask a logistics question again? Because I asked this in the phone, I forgot it. Status update versus revised?
So status update generally is we're just getting an update.
On one of like the notes